When I arrived in the 80s, everyone said, oh, you have to get on the housing ladder. That's what it was called. And there was this assumption that you bought
You were going to climb.
the smallest possible place you could, and you would then sell that and buy a slightly bigger one when you needed it.
Yeah.
So everyone was always living in the right-sized house because the transaction cost of moving to the right-sized house was not great. Now it's enormous if you live in London.
George Osborne. We have to blame George Osborne for that one.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. I will happily blame George Osborne about anything.
Yeah, really.
Just name it.
A lot of stealth taxes, a lot of sort of,
unreal.
as Thomas Jefferson always said, taxes should be simple and transparent.
Yes.
And the public should understand what they're paying and what it's funding.
Hello folks, and welcome back to the Restore Britain podcast. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Rupert Lowe, our leader, and Catherine McBride, who is a free market economist with a special focus on trade and agriculture. We are going to be doing a bit of a budget special this week because in the wake of unprecedented chaos around Rachel Reeves's, I would say, disastrous announcements this past week, I think we're going to dive into what this means for ordinary people, what it means for cost of living, and I'm going to be asking the question why I, as a young guy who loves Britain, wants to start a family here, own a house and build a business, why the hell I should stay in this country. So, folks, let's get into it. Strong foundations and secure future was the slogan that was attached to the budget. I can see that on your document there, Rupert.
I've got it here, Charlie. It's, proudly says, as you say, secure, strong foundations and secure future.
And is that the case with this budget? Is that what it's delivering?
Well, my view, and I think obviously all these government departments like to have a little sort of almost tongue-in-cheek strapline, which we all know isn't true. I prefer to say earthquake zone, accident waiting to happen.
Yes.
I think that would actually be a far more apt heading for this document. But Rachel Reeves is a strong blend of arrogance and ignorance, and I think she displayed that in the House on Wednesday or yesterday. So I think, she deludes herself. She tells us debt's falling. We all know that debt's not falling. We all know that national debt is rising. It's far too high. We have a vast liability for civil service pensions off balance sheet, somewhere between 3 and 5 trillion, maybe even a little bit more. Half the time, I don't think we know the true numbers. I think we're sort of living in a delusional world, and we have this counting system called Oscar 2, which I'm trying to get some visibility and transparency on, but I'm pretty sure that's understating our assets and overstating our liabilities. And in the same way that Enron took a long time to go bust, if you imagine a country going the same way, which I think we are, I think we're marching towards the cliff. We're losing our best people, we're losing our rainmakers, we're losing those people, not only with money, but those people with ability. And they don't come back very quickly. So I think the formula that we're seeing, and yesterday just cemented that even further, is almost a self-destructing policy. And when I see Rachel Reeves basically crediting indolence, laziness, and irresponsibility in terms of family size, and debiting the enterprising, the people who work hard, the people who respect the fact that if they can't afford children, they don't have them. I mean, that is just a complete disaster of a formula, and I think we're all going to bear the consequences. But I think, Catherine, you've seen it. You're a far more eminent economist than me. I mean, I'm a sort of city boy who's had to sort of duck and dive for the last 25 years in the city of London and various other places, running a football club and doing other real things in the economy. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I do think that there was this weird dichotomy in it where they are increasing spending now and they're going to increase taxes in 3-4 years, just before the next election. And the only people who actually believe that's going to happen is probably the OBR. And the OBR continues to be conned into, oh yeah, these politicians, they're so great, and they've produced yet a lot of figures. They have lowered the productivity, but not by that much. And if you compare it with other more credible economic groups, their productivity expectations in the future are much higher than pretty much anyone else's.
Don't you think it's extraordinary that the OBR actually managed to leak the budget? and give Kemi Badenoch a chance to, I thought, perform quite well, actually, at the dispatch box yesterday.
Reeves looked like she'd seen a ghost.
I know. I thought she did very well. But again, the question I think we have to ask ourselves is, why do the people running the country need to have these so-called experts? I've always found experts get things badly wrong, and the OBR, as we know, has a terrible track record of economic forecasting. And yet the government relies almost entirely, as you say, on these forecasts, which often prove to be wrong. They've backloaded all these. She's broken her manifesto pledge by actually freezing tax thresholds, which is going to put up taxes for working people, despite the fact she told us she wouldn't.
Well, not just working people. It's going to actually push pensioners into the tax bracket.
Everybody.
Every pensioner. And many of them will have not realised that they are going to have to put in a tax return now, because once the pension rise goes up in April, they're suddenly over the 12,250 level where they have to pay tax. So that extra payment will be taxed.
But why do these incompetent people need to hide behind experts?
Well, I think
it's become common throughout government, because
Yes.
I don't think they know what they're doing. So what they want to be able to do is blame somebody else for getting it wrong, rather than they're actually elected to run the country, not the OBR. And again, the OBR, if they hadn't had the report, couldn't have leaked it. And I don't know what you think, and I'd be interesting to know your perspective on this, but I think genuinely Starmer and Reeves knew they had a problem with the backbenchers. So a lot of the budget, I don't think the numbers were as bad as everybody expected them to be, but I think the ideology that's driven this comes from their backbenchers. It's a sort of Fabian ideology, and it's misguided in that they are, as we say, going to benefit probably largely immigrants with big families who are going to get the benefit of this two-child cap change. And they are effectively going to punish people who work hard and are self-sufficient and don't bother the state or trouble the state for money. So I think it's an ideological budget, and I think it probably had to happen, because if not, there was going to be a backbench revolt which would have undermined Starmer. So I think it's an interesting debate to have as to whether she actually needed to put up taxes, because all she's done is put them up to fund this two-child benefit cap lift.
well, she's also increased what she calls her headroom. So yes, there are a lot of rumours that I think have been disastrous for the economy that were put out, I suspect on purpose, so that whatever happened, it looked better than it actually was. And so, yes, she didn't really need to put up taxes at all, but she has put them up for this. And the cap is interesting because it's on universal credit. So it's only for people on universal credit that the cap is for 2 children. And unfortunately, you're right, the people on, sometimes, people have had a job and they were made unemployment. And I think after not just this budget, but last year's budget, there will be more people who are unemployed.
I agree.
Because, but let's.
And I think we all agree you have to look after the most vulnerable. You have to do that.
But with the OBR thing, let me just. There's so much in what you just said. The OBR is sort of a captured group. So yes, before they were set up, you and I can remember this. You don't
Me
know.
not so
You
much.
didn't. You not so much.
Far too young.
Yeah, but anyhow, before we had the OBR, the Treasury did their own calculations, but then multiple groups in the city would rubbish it or praise it or whatever, and all of the newspapers could be relied on to have proper accountants and economists looking at it. Now it's the OBR and what they say goes. When you think, you can look at half a dozen other economic forecasting groups who are all private enterprise, so they have to be good at it because they get paid. Their clients are only going to keep employing them if they keep getting it right.
They have skin in the game.
They have skin in the game.
Whereas the OBR doesn't.
That's
The
the free
OBR
market.
has zero skin in the game. They've been wrong and wrong and wrong again, and they're all still employed, including Richard Hughes, the chairman, who should be fired purely for this leak yesterday.
And to be fair, this morning he did come out and say that if Reeves and Starmer and other Labour MPs express a lack of confidence in him, he will resign. So he may well go.
Excellent.
We'll have to see.
Excellent. I can't wait.
I'll
be there. I'll be there cheering. I'll be there waving flags.
But on this, though, I do think this is really important because, again, me as a young guy who's just trying to make his way in this country, I don't have, a kind of economic education. I'm just looking at the economy as it stands. I read this piece from Rob Colville from the CPS in the Times about the OBR, which, I mean, like all of these quangos, is, it's very opaque and quite difficult to get your head around what it is they're actually doing that serves the public interest, because they consistently, since they were set up, have been off in their predictions and in their forecasts by 10 to 40 billion pounds. I mean, what is this all about? And why is it that they are, as I understand it, the chief body that informs fiscal decisions by the government when they're so consistently wrong? Why is it that they are allowed to continue to exist? Is it just a kind of, it's keeping people in jobs, or scratching each other's backs, or what is it?
Almost every quango should be reviewed. I'm sure you'll get around to it, Rupert, sooner or later. They need to look at them all because they're all as bad as the others, and half of them, then the clientele, if you like, the employed people in the quango end up working for the people they were meant to be monitoring, or there are some really shocking things happening in quangos. I would look at the climate change one first. That's got some very dodgy stuff, and the OBR. But as I was saying about
my
the budget,
favourite subject, Catherine. I mean, at the end of the day, what's happened is the sovereign parliament that we used to have, that was a function of our sort of democracy, an absolute keystone to our democracy, has been undermined by Blairite legislation. So we've ended up with quangos. So power's been devolved from the elected assembly to the quangos, to the regulators, to effectively many other what I call quasi-governmental bodies who are not accountable to the British people.
Yes.
So what's happened is Parliament has been undermined. The selection processes of Cameron and Blair have ensured that you have low-grade MPs in Parliament.
Yeah.
That means you have low-grade ministers, and we only have to look at the Labour front bench to know how low-grade they can be. And they can't hold the civil service to account. The civil service has proliferated hugely.
Yes.
And ultimately what we've got is a state that is completely out of control, that, as you and I know, accounts now for probably directly 50% of GDP and indirectly more than that. And that's why I think we don't get these immediate downturns, because the state, if it runs out of money, unlike you and I who have to balance our budget, the state finds ways of printing money or financing deficits, or, basically it's a question of which dice is the cup under, which cup is the dice under, because they are such a huge group of people, and they can actually print money, they can borrow money, they can obfuscate. I think they're lying about the actual national balance sheet. There are many things I think that are incredibly wrong, and I look at all of this and I think to myself, why can't we get, and I'm beginning to think, this is an interesting thought which has been going through my mind really overnight, is why don't we get 20 top businessmen to join Restore Britain and actually put together a proper cabinet that could run the country properly, effectively, and hold to account this government waste. Because every time government wastes money, as you know, it's the British people who have to pay the tax to pay for that largesse and that waste and that inefficiency. And nobody stops to think about that. And to your point, you young people, unless you actually fight this, you never will buy a house.
Yep.
Because the way to solve this is not more tax, not more government, not more state. It's actually to cut taxes, cut the size of the state, and cut regulation. The regulators have they're completely out of control. Yeah. The lawyers are out of control. The rules, the licensing, all of the nonsense that is holding Britain back needs to go. And then I think very quickly, as we saw with Thatcher, you'd see opportunities for young people like yourself would open up. And this is the best place in the world to live. But everybody's now, and that's the point of Restore Britain, everybody's got to fight for it, or it's not going to change. And I see it daily in Parliament.
Well, to your first point, Rupert, there is tremendous interest in what we're doing among young guys who work in the city, who are trying to build a life for themselves, guys who want to start their own businesses, and all these kind of, enterprising young people who are now leaving the country in droves. I mean, we had data out today that suggested that net migration is down massively to, I think, just about 200,000. But actually, that's only because net emigration
so many people
is at a record high.
Yeah. And
it's primarily, honestly, upwards of 90% British nationals under the age of 35. I mean, this is ridiculous.
The fattest rats always jump off the ship first.
Let us go back to the budget, because you probably noticed that they have put up the minimum wage again, and they've put up the wages for the 20 and 21-year-olds, and put up the wages again for the 16 and 17-year-olds. And this is making it, employing young people is getting more and more expensive. So we already have 15.3% youth unemployment. That's under 25-year-olds. So we just made it more expensive to employ them last April, and we're going to make them even more expensive to employ them next April. Meanwhile, they've got this new scheme that's going to sort of get young people who are unemployed into work. So if you've been unemployed for 18 months, the government is going to pay for you to work in a company for 6 months. Now, that's a great idea. I like that, but it's a bit like, well, why are you sort of giving with your left hand and taking away with your right hand? You could maybe make it just easier for the SME to employ them outright without this government handout. Instead, you've made it much more expensive for an SME to employ a young person, so they're not employing them. And then a lot of young people are going, gee whiz, I can get jobs in America, I can get jobs in the UAE, I can get jobs somewhere else.
It's not only young people, though. I mean, the businesses I run, with Angela Rayner's workers' rights bill, why do you want to employ anybody? That's AI
true.
is coming along, and it's incredibly powerful. It's not perfect yet, but it will. Yeah. If you say we're sort of in junior school now, within 4 or 5 years, you're going to be at the top of the university.
I got to say, I did think "strong foundations, secure future" sounded a bit like a ChatGPT generated slogan.
Well, they wrote the whole thing, but you do find this with the. So a lot of people are putting people on contracts rather than employing them to avoid the workers' rights. But then you get into all of the IR35 rules. And that's another complication. So it's easier to employ a contractor from India, for instance, for a few months and send them back than to employ a contractor in the UK. So we've actually got this system where people who live here are doing contract work outside of the UK because they can, and people outside the UK are doing contract work in the UK because they can. And you think,
this is what they don't understand, Catherine.
insane?
With the digital revolution and with what's happening with AI, people can work from anywhere in the world.
Well, that's true.
If you've got Wi-Fi, you can do loads of things now, which you don't have to live here.
That's true.
And I think what we've all got to do, and the British are very meek, they're very mild, they're very accepting of authority. But I mean, the truth is that the government has become the enemy of enterprise. It's become the enemy of the people it's supposed to be serving.
Yeah.
And I actually think the way they collect tax, they talk about people not paying enough tax. What we should be talking about is how much money government is wasting. And I see this now. I'm on the Public Accounts Committee. I can tell you that the state is incapable of running anything. And it's wasting taxpayers' money at a rate of knots. So I actually think the state has now become almost malign. And I think it's become out of necessity. It's attacking decent people, and it's trying to collect tax to fund itself. So it's become a sort of self-serving body. And what it does is, and if you look at what they threaten, all the sort of things they threaten us with, they're trying to threaten us, as we know, with digital ID. They're trying to sort of find all sorts of ways of bolting us down and making us accountable to this evil state.
And they're due to spend, I think, £1.8 billion on the implementation of digital ID in this budget.
So it's actually...
that's our money.
And it's in the budget.
Money and it's evil.
Yeah.
It was in the budget, but it wasn't in the manifesto. So they are definitely going to do this.
Nowhere to be seen.
I know, and no one wants it. No one voted for it, but they've put aside money for it. So
another one of these promises that Reeves has been actually very proud of, which she's now which is in the budget, is this landlord tax. Now this is one of these things where if you say this to a lot of young people who are naturally fairly liberal, fairly left wing, not even crazily so, just a kind of a basic level of suspicion for capitalism, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
they will hear that and think, well, that sounds great because landlords are parasitic, people who just feed off of the hard work of me and my friends and all this sort of thing. But actually, I mean, again, I look at my pay packet at the end of the month and a third of my money has gone to the government, and now I'm hearing that my landlord's going to pay more tax, but actually he's just going to pass that off to me.
Yeah.
Is this not correct?
Yeah, and I think that's the same with the mansion tax, which is another tax on London. Let's not pretend. There are some very large houses in the country that will be affected by it, but generally anything above a terrace house in London. So a family house. This is yet another cost on families. Yeah. So while we're giving money to people on universal credit with half a dozen children, we are making it much more difficult for someone who's actually got a job, working in the city, working in a law firm, doing something, even working in Westminster.
We don't want too many lawyers.
Well, we don't want too many lawyers, but
steady on, Catherine.
We don't need more of them. Whatever they're
doing,
they've got enough income to pay the mortgage, but they've got to pay massive stamp duty already, and now they're going to have to pay this mansion tax. And they are not living in a mansion. They're living in a terrace house in Clapham.
It's going to open up a can of worms because house prices are falling. You can't sell houses.
Well, that's true.
I know lots of people, and this is again goes to the point. She talks about we're going to build houses. No, you're not, Rachel, because you're not going to build houses unless they're selling. Because there's nobody in the private sector who's going to build loads of houses that sit there empty because they can't sell them. And houses are literally not selling at the moment.
Yeah.
So when you come to this mansion tax, you've got all these bands of what they're going to charge, but how do you know today what those houses are worth or what they could sell for? They're going to start opening a can of worms by saying your house is worth $5 million. No, it's not. I couldn't sell it for $2.5 million.
Yeah.
So you're going to have lots of injustice taking place, and a state that's going to basically, I think, end up like HMRC do, trying to be dictatorial about what the value of your house is and therefore about the tax they charge you. I mean, HMRC, to my mind, is completely unaccountable to anybody other than itself. Yeah. It's become an extremely damaging instrument of government. It's a blunt instrument. They don't communicate properly. They don't often do email even. So, getting hold of them's a nightmare.
Oh, don't get me started on getting hold of them. Oh, my goodness.
No, they are completely out of control. This guy, Jim Harrer, who runs it, I mean, again, he needs to have the spotlight shone in on that muck heap. But at the end of the day, this is what we've got. And people are so accepting of it all. Yeah. And they're accepting of what Rachel Reeves is doing in the budget, when we've just identified that actually the numbers don't justify these tax increases.
No. And also, with going back to the landlord taxes, if a landlord owns a property that falls into one of these bands, they'll just pass that on to renters as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
So, it's
inflationary.
Yes. But one of the reasons the OBR signed this off is by taking the £150 which they added to your energy bill. They're now going to take that out of your energy bill. That's going to lower inflation. So therefore, the OBR is fine with signing this off because the inflation's going to come down, which will allow everything else to fall into place. Oh, it is really hard not to laugh. You have to go, if they turned up to you as a businessman and this was a sort of here's my new company, would you like to invest in it? You just laugh at them and say, don't be stupid, go away.
This is my question, Catherine, is, I'm someone who is, I'm quite in favour of the existence of a welfare state. I do think that we shouldn't have children going hungry, we shouldn't have people living on the streets in our country, because we have more than enough wealth to make sure that at least everybody has a roof over their head, right? And I don't like this I think I may have said this in the last episode, but I don't like this quite what I view as an American attitude that if my neighbour gets cancer, then it's not my problem. We are a neighbourly people, the British. And so I think the existence of a welfare state that functions is absolutely something that we should have. But my question is, I look at this budget, and again, as a layman who does, I'm not an economist or anything like that, but I look at the fact that they are extracting wealth from the wealth generating element of our society, productive Britain, and giving it to the unproductive element of our society, compromising and undermining the integrity of the household as in my view, the fundamental economic unit of society, or what should be considered the fundamental economic unit of
Yeah.
society. And I have to ask, like, do these people actually believe that what they're doing is going to help people like us, like myself, like my friends, like my family? Do they believe that raising the minimum wage is in the interest of young people? Do they believe that raising landlord taxes is going to be good for renters? Like, do they think that the mansion tax, for example, is going to be good for people looking to buy a house? Do they actually, or is this all just politics? Are they looking to appease their backbenchers who are going to revolt if they keep the 2-child benefit cap? Are they looking to appease their voters who are essentially, as you say, Rupert, somewhat indolent? Certainly a proportion will be
9
voting for
million
Labour.
people of working age aren't working, Charlie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
I'm all in favour
Yeah.
of a safety net for people who can't look
Yeah.
after themselves. I think that's quite right.
Yeah.
And you're right. We've always been a country which has
Neighbourly.
had found ways of doing it. Before we had the state, you had the friendly societies. We had probably the best sort of voluntary structure for looking after
Yes.
those people who fell on hard times. That happened naturally. But yes, I mean, at the end of the day, the problem with statism is it doesn't have a conscience, it doesn't have a heart, it's only interested in serving itself. And I think this is a budget that serves the Labour Party,
Yeah.
but it doesn't serve the nation.
So they're buying
And
votes.
I
Is
don't
that-
know
is
what
that-
Catherine
it's
thinks
very,
about that.
very redistributive. So they're taking off the workers, as you say, or the people who are the rainmakers, really, the people who
They're all
that
going.
are actually. Well, of course, it's very depressing. They're leaving the country, where things that she could have done that would have revived the country. I mean, they're cutting £150 off your energy bill, but they claim they're going to make it easier for North Sea oil if it can connect to an existing pipeline. But they're not going to open new leases, but they're also not getting rid of this energy profits levy, which was put in by the Conservatives, increased by the Conservatives, cemented by Rachel Reeves last year. And then they're going to wonder why, we're letting them have more licenses, but because we're taxing them at 78% for some unimaginable reason, they haven't decided to come here and actually extract more oil and gas.
Well, I think you've got to watch what the hands are doing, not what the mouth is saying on that.
Well, that's true.
Aberdeen's dying. Okay,
Yeah.
Aberdeen is literally
But it's not just
it led the
Aberdeen.
world in offshore
Yeah.
oil, and it's dying. We've still got 30 plus years of proven oil and gas reserves
More
in the
than
North
that,
Sea.
yeah.
At the moment, Norway is finding ways of innovatively developing her fields more and extracting more oil from fields that were thought to be
Yeah.
nearly finished, and we're buying it.
Yes.
So-
well, that's
so
the other insane thing.
Mad
because
Red Ed, as you quite rightly say, is driving up the costs of our energy because this
Yeah.
renewable energy is a complete scam. And he's basically destroying our oil and gas industry. Whereas what we should be doing, if you had these businessmen running the country, you would be obviously cognizant of the fact you don't want to pollute the planet, and you would be managing an exit from oil and gas by effectively using our reserves as we transition sensibly and affordably. We've got fracking reserves we're not using. And, look at what fracking has done in America. I mean, in North and South Dakota, that's largely what's brought oil and gas prices down because they've, again, using technology, using advances. But you don't get that if you tax, to your point, if you tax people into oblivion, they stop investing.
Exactly. But it's more than that because Norway doesn't use its oil and gas. It exports it. All of its own electricity
Of course, it's got a
is
huge
coming
wealth
from their
Huge wealth
electricity
fund, yeah.
is hydroelectricity.
Yeah.
Now we have an exportable commodity, oil, gas, and coal, and we have closed them down or closing them down, even though the rest of the world is running on oil, gas, and coal. I'm sorry if you want to close down CO2 emissions, but it's not going to happen because China, India, and the rest of the developing world is using coal and gas more than they ever have before.
China particularly.
Yeah, and India. India has a lot of coal. I don't blame them for using it. They should.
And we account for less than 1%
yeah.
of emissions anyway. So it's not like we're going to change anything.
No, actually, it's less than and it's 0.85 now because world emissions went up. Ours actually didn't change.
Really? Yeah.
We're just a smaller part of the total because the total is getting bigger and bigger every year.
Well, we're virtue
It's
signaling,
just
aren't we? No, we're
primary
virtue
school
signaling.
map. Yes.
And destroying our influence
But we're
in the
destroying,
world.
because we're not just losing Aberdeen, we're losing the refineries. And
Yep.
the refineries were not just taking crude oil and turning it into petrol and diesel, they were also turning it into the short chain hydrocarbons that you use to make plastics and chemicals and pharmaceuticals and all of this, most of the modern world is coming out of oil and gas. And our politicians have so little science knowledge that they don't understand that. And it's such a key part of our economy. And we are losing these companies, INEOS, just moving to America. It's like, that's fine. GB, you go back to the Ice Age, the coal, go back to the Flintstones. As someone sent me a cartoon yesterday of Fred Flintstone going, this is where we're going, this is where we're heading. And that's where we'll be. And it's completely
Charlie
crazy.
might be too young for Fred Flintstone.
Yeah, I know, you won't know what I'm talking about.
You've heard of Fred Flintstone.
Yeah, I know.
Yes,
I know.
from
By
all
now
voices,
we're
yeah.
meant to be in the Jetsons. And
What was she
instead
called,
we're
Wilma?
going back to the...
Was she called Wilma? Fred and Wilma, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think it was.
bit beyond,
And
before my
Barney
time, mate.
Rubble.
Come on, Charlie, you don't know, really. They can't.
No, but this is what I find really scary, Catherine, is, I think as a basic principle, I think that some degree of self-sufficiency in those most crucial strategic resources like energy should be the goal of any government, not just Labour or Conservative. It should not be, in my view, a partisan issue. I think producing enough energy, at the very least, to get by domestically has to be a priority. But this is what's so
you wouldn't have
strange.
to put taxes up like this if you were
Well, this is exactly the
responsibly
point. It's like this is,
using what nature has given us. This would not be necessary.
Yeah, and they call themselves the Labour Party. I know this is a very tired point at this point, but they are not serving the interests of what they would call working people, which they can't even define for themselves. If they really wanted to, I think, put the national interest first and put the interest of people who want to work first, they would be reopening the coal mines. They'd be reindustrialising this country, and yet they seem to have no interest in doing that. In fact, they seem to be interested in doing the opposite of that.
It's Fabian do-gooding ideology. That's what it is.
Well, they say they want to build houses, but yesterday they missed out on the opportunity to remove stamp duty land tax, which is on housing, which they lowered. The Conservatives had at least moved the threshold up so that a lot of young people didn't have to pay it. Now, Labor brought that down and kept that tax. You're going, well, if you really want to help build houses, make it cheaper to build. Because every one of housing materials, whether it's bricks, cement, roof tiles, all of that stuff is very emissions intensive if you just measure it from when it's made. But it lasts for 30, 40, 50 years. So the idea that we should be worried about the emissions when it's made without going, but this brick will last for 50 years. Therefore, we're going to divide it by 50. So the emissions are not what you say; they're a 50th of that. But they've completely, missed that little opportunity, and so they're making house building more expensive and claiming they're going to build more houses.
Yeah, and we also have to remember, of course, that the population continues to grow, despite these net immigration figures coming out today. I mean, the population has exploded over the last, certainly over my lifetime.
They were still net positive. So even though a lot more people are leaving, still more people are arriving.
Yeah.
And they say they want to get them out of, we know they're mainly living in hotels at our expense.
A huge number of social housing as well.
Yeah, and if you want to move them out of hotels, you are going to have to there has to be more building.
Yeah, and this is the thing
simple.
that really gets me is there was during my parents' time, for example, when they bought their first house, buying a house was just something you did. Buying a house was just something that everybody could achieve reasonably, unless you really had.
Well, it wasn't just that. When I arrived in the 80s, everyone said, you have to get on the housing ladder. That's what it was called. And there was this assumption that you were going to climb the smallest possible place you could, and you would then sell that and buy a slightly bigger one when you needed it. Yeah. So everyone was always living in the right-sized house because the transaction cost of moving to the right-sized house was not great. Now it's enormous if you live in London.
George Osborne. We have to blame George Osborne for that one.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. I will happily blame George Osborne about anything.
Yeah, really.
Just name it.
A lot of stealth taxes, a lot of sort of,
unreal.
As Thomas Jefferson always said, taxes should be simple and transparent.
Yes.
And the public should understand what they're paying and what it's funding.
Yes.
And do you
is
know
the point,
what you're
Rupert.
funding, Charlie?
But this is the point. Is in my view of this. I have a sort of paternalistic view of government, perhaps more so than yourself, Rupert. And I'm a big believer in the idea that tax should be regarded in a well-ordered society as a duty. We all have to pay it because that's just what you do, right? If you want to have a functioning state, then you need to do that. And so people shouldn't feel like they're being robbed when they pay their taxes. But that's what it feels like now because it's spent on nonsense.
Well, that's
it's spent
the thing.
on stuff that doesn't benefit us.
We are unfortunately taxing first and then think about what to spend it on. We should, in fact, decide what we want to spend it on. What should be financed by the government, what is better financed by the government, and then raise the money to pay for that. Instead, we're let's see how much money we can get out of them. Let's shake them all down and then we'll invent stupid ways to spend it.
Yeah.
And that
just
is
self-justifying.
and I think that upsets a lot of people.
My
Well,
view,
this is
my view,
interesting.
Charlie, is that the government should be wearing a mask and calling itself Dick Turpin, because that's what they are.
Yeah.
They are
At
literally,
Yeah.
they're telling us to stand and deliver,
Yeah.
and they're doing it in what I would call a dishonest way. So I think it's fascinating to hear what Catherine has to say. I can't believe what we're all putting up with, frankly.
I know. And just one point that I am interested in, a technical point for both of you. On what you were just saying, Catherine, one complaint that I've read recently from the likes of William Hague, of all people, is that part of the problem here is the fiscal rules, and it is the fact that the time horizon that is kind of used when we're thinking about the economy is 5 years. And so a lot of the time it's based on the electoral cycle and what's going to, I think, win the governing party the most votes. And it doesn't account for the fact that our international rivals are like China, for example, they're thinking in the order of decades. They're thinking in the order of centuries. And so some have suggested that the fiscal framework needs to be fundamentally reimagined to think on a far broader timescale. I just wanted to understand what you both think of that.
Well, I would like to let the free market do that. I would like the government to step out of so much that it thinks it knows about and thinks it can fund. Let because a business used to think long term. Businesses used to reinvest their profits so that they could grow their business, so that they could expand. When I grew up in Australia, almost everything that we had there, manufactured goods, consumer goods, everything from the sweets and the fizzy drinks in the shop, were all British companies. They were massive exporters, and they did that without, they must have had their own 50-year plan or whatever it was. They didn't need sort of government help. Now we've got government full of, as Rupert's already said, people with no experience in business whatsoever, no knowledge of how the system works, thinking that they can run the country like it's one big company. Most of them have never even managed staff before, which is why we have so many problems in Westminster in terms of, bullying or harassment or whatever they're doing. And I think, unfortunately, that attitude has spread towards private enterprise through the police system. Almost the whole country, it's the victim is always right, and they are victims,
HRification.
If their feelings got hurt 50 years ago, then, they're a victim. Yeah. And it's like, when I went to school, my feelings were probably hurt on a daily basis, and I probably hurt other people's feelings on a daily basis.
So what?
And that's made me tougher.
That's
it made
being a
us
human
stronger.
being,
That is, in fact, I think one of the problems we have with your generation is we have too many single child families, because the biggest beatings I ever got in my house were by my siblings, and I probably beat them back, I'm sure, both verbally and punching each other. And that made me stronger. And I think we've got far too many people who've never had to fight their corner and go, actually, I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
I think to your point, Charlie, and I've got one to Catherine's point. I think to your point about these backloaded forecasts, it's what always happens, because ultimately I always say with computer forecasts, if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out.
Yes.
And you're getting this, I think, and a lot of this is just predicated on if you like, thin air. And that's because they assume growth rates of a certain level, which we've undershot consistently. They assume debt levels of a certain amount, and you only have to look at last month's trade figures or budget figures. We were trading at a deficit, I think, last month. I think it was 16.4 billion, I think, something like that. Yeah. And for the year, I think we're up to 116 billion, I think. So, I mean, that is huge. So. And then you've got, obviously, the fact that all these workers' rights legislation, the higher taxes, you've got all the fiscal drag on the economy is huge. So they don't understand the essence of private businesses fighting for their survival. And you probably know that to that point, I did a 10-minute rule bill on quantitative easing, because I think quantitative easing goes to a lot of what we're talking about. So in Weimar Germany, shortly before it collapsed, it became incredibly dishonest, and I think Britain's become dishonest. Yeah. I think we're probably in the cradle of organised crime. I think the more we centralised everything, the more we've effectively allowed our judiciary to select its own rather than using the Lord Chancellor, which we used to do to effectively select the judges have now almost self-selecting on the basis of all these sort of vile things like DEI and everything else. So we've got these viruses which we've been infected with, and I think I don't see the economy growing as they forecast.
Yeah.
What I see in my businesses is cutbacks.
Yeah.
I see people not confident, they're not investing, and to your point about, you're right about long-term investment, because the thing that drives an economy is long-term, well-directed private sector investment.
Yeah, and confidence, basic confidence.
Not state central planning.
Yeah.
And to Catherine's point, I think again, and you probably, we've watched our stock market. When I was in the city, London was an absolute prime centre. We had the Eurobond market, we had a thriving London Stock Exchange. And then we had Tony Blair, again, and most of it goes back to Blair and his mob. You got the Financial Services Market Act. And since then, London as a financial centre has declined because we've been over-regulated. We've also got an ageing population who've got a lot of money in the stock market. So instead of the stock market fulfilling the function it should fulfill, which is to match the risk taker with the entrepreneur, so you actually got the idea meeting the money.
Yes.
And then you got a proper centre for what I call enlightened growth. You haven't got that now. What you've got is the baby boomer generation, where a lot of the wealth is locked up.
Yep.
You and I have touched on this before. And they are quite selfish, as we saw during COVID. They got worried about dying, so they locked all the young down and destroyed the young's lives. So we'll stay off that one for now. But at the end of the day, Weimar Germany came dishonest. I think we've become dishonest. And what's happened is the whole focus of our society is not risk-taking and growth generation. It's become, if you like, safety in retirement.
Yes.
And so a lot of our businesses that you talked about just now were private businesses where you had boards that thought long-term, planned long-term, invested long-term, and delivered long-term.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand is that very often, if you invest long-term, your short-term returns are much lower. And what happens with a stock market, which is owned by a faceless group of pensioners whose money is run by institutions
like BlackRock.
and experts like BlackRock, like old Larry Fink, our friend.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what happens is, if you don't maximize short-term profits, the board either gets sacked or the company gets taken over by a predator who then is able to release the benefits of this long-term investment. So I think we've seen a complete shift in the basis of our economic growth, the basis of the way in which we raise money to finance that growth.
Yeah.
And I worked for Deutsche Bank, and the Germans did have a much better model than us. That was, the banks used to support their businesses post-war on a very long-term basis, particularly the Deutsche Bank, who I worked for, and Commerzbank, and a lot of the Dresdner Bank, a lot of the German regional banks the same. So their companies, which is why they were so successful, were able to plan long-term, and they knew that those banks were going to stay with them. You watch our banks. I mean, our banks are as fickle as anything. They have credit committees. 1 minute you're okay, the next minute, they start to doubt you. So a lot of our businesses have been, I think, have suffered. I've seen them suffer really from Blairite years on, as this long-term investment that you so rightly outline has gone. It's disappeared, and we're now just a short-term husk of what we were.
To bring it back to the budget, yesterday she lightened my life when she started saying we're going to do stamp duty. And just a 3-year holiday on stamp duty on shares. On the there's already no stamp duty on AIM market, so it's on anyone who wants to list on the main LSE.
That's not going to turn it around.
Exactly, it's not going to turn around. It's only for 3 years.
You get a much better valuation on NASDAQ.
Exactly. You get,
Why would you
if you
come
go
here?
and list in America, you get a higher valuation. You don't have to do. You can have 2 or 3 different types of shares, so you can control the voting rights if you want to. Entrepreneurs only sell about 100 shares in the US, and they're on the main New York Stock Exchange. And also, they don't have the DEI board requirements. In London, you have to have 40% women. And I say this as a woman myself. It's like, who cares? None of the Magic Seven would have made it onto the London Stock Exchange. Not one of the 7 stocks that have been driving world markets for the last 10 years.
Of course not.
None of them would have made the DEI requirements of the London Stock Exchange.
The FCA and the PRA would have ensured that they were brought to heel. And again,
Yes.
the power of these regulators, the unaccountability of them, the cost of running them. And again, the FCA, as you know, is funded by levies on the industry, which makes the industry even less efficient. And they do nothing.
Yeah.
They're tire kickers. They are complete and utter tire kickers.
Well,
most of them are lawyers
Yes.
who don't even understand finance.
Most of them are lawyers. Unfortunately, a lot of them are female lawyers. And they've
I didn't
never
dare
actually
say that,
worked.
Catherine.
Yeah, I know. I thought I'd fill that in for
Get away with
you.
it.
I'd fill that in for you. But
You
they've-
can say it because you're
I know
you're a
I
woman.
can say it. But they've never worked in the front line. So if they worked in the city, they're in the back office somewhere. They never worked in the dealing room. And until you've worked in the dealing room and you've had to win some and lose some, you don't understand how it works and where the profits come from, where the profit centres are.
Yeah.
So these people are just cost centre people who are now running the city like a cost centre. And then they're surprised that they're not making any money. And
But
it's
this
like-
is what's so worrying about this budget, is we agree that these big multinational companies, which are pretty woke, they are, if you like, fully
Well,
paid up
yeah.
members of the
Yeah. Well, they
the
can
sort of
afford to
lunacy,
be.
the lunacy
Yeah,
that we've all
exactly.
subscribed to recently.
Yeah.
The sort of, as they say, what is it? They say, who the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. And I think we've almost got there. But anyway, so I think still the backbone of this country, and this goes to the previous budget and this budget, is private businesses. It's basically those people who toil away, often don't make huge margins. They responsibly employ lots of people who they treat like their family. They hold the communities together. And what Labour has done with BPR and APR is actually they're going to break the backbone of Britain.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely shocked yesterday when I saw police arresting farmers.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what are we doing? These farmers are peacefully, quite rightly, protesting. Did you see that happening when we had people chanting from the river to the sea about?
Yeah.
Most of them didn't know which river and which sea.
Yeah.
So again, it's absolutely disgraceful the
And
way
they had organised it 6 weeks earlier. So they were only cancelled the day before.
I mean, it was dangerous to wear tweed in London yesterday.
Yes.
You end up in a pair of handcuffs, and
Yes.
I saw some chap having all his personal possessions taken away. I mean,
Anyone
what
in-
on earth is Sadiq Khan's war zone doing to these farmers? They should leave them alone.
Yeah. Well, it is ridiculous that they had organised this and then at the last minute they cancelled it and then they're arresting anyone wearing a Barber jacket.
But this is what I mean.
It's one of our better exports, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, one of our
One of our efficient industries,
yes,
to be fair.
exactly.
But this is what I find really scary is you look at the the groups that this government has taken aim at in this budget and previously, and it is literally like the bones of Britain. It is farmers, it is pubs, these essential. It is energy.
Well, actually,
right?
they've lowered the costs for. They're going to change the business rates a bit so that finally they're giving small businesses and pubs, hospitality, they're going to get a bit of a break and they're going to lump it onto anyone.
But they're all going bust, Catherine.
Well,
They're
I know.
finished.
I know. Meanwhile,
they've been
put up
hollowed
the
out. They put up the minimum
and they
wage.
put up the cost of employing people. So
Yeah.
it's like, we're going to lower your business rates with one hand, as I said earlier. It's all, we're giving you this hand and we're taking it away with that hand. And until you read both sides of the budget, you might think, oh, good, business rates are down. Oh no, my employee costs are going back up again.
So to wrap up then,
And on a
just the
positive
budget.
note, we should say, Charles.
Well, I will try to.
They deserve it. And Catherine
Yeah.
may add some other things, but I think two things I'd like to say. Well done, Rachel. Motability, which has been one of my absolute bugbears, which is a complete and utter fraud, which basically, again, is a huge tax on productive Britain.
Yeah.
At least she's started the process. I think all she's
Well, you
done,
can't get a Mercedes off
all
it
she's
anymore.
done is stop
so-
having a Merc. I was
Yeah.
going to say, well,
Yeah.
you can still have a VW Tiguan, new every 3 years with three named drivers and tax paid, service, the whole lot. Wrong.
Yeah.
And the other thing is obviously apprenticeships. But again, apprenticeships, most responsible private businesses who think long term do have apprentices anyway. And to your point, you're much better to let the private sector decide do they want to invest in apprentices than you are to start lobbing money and probably creating all sorts of arbitrages for people who want to set up what I call apprenticeships that just ranch farm grants, rather than actually genuinely investing in their apprentices. But those are two little rays of light. I don't know. Did you see any other little rays
actually,
of light?
weirdly, those are my two. Also, the stamp duty, at
And we
least for
didn't
3
talk
years.
before this, did we, at
No,
all?
we didn't. And the three years on stamp duty is at least better than nothing. But it won't. I don't think it's going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
But I do think with the apprenticeships, you're right. Because if the government is paying the bill of the young person who's been unemployed for 18 months, are you going to be firing them when they turn up late, or putting the same sort of pressure on them you would put on someone that you're paying for?
That's a really good point.
And I think that is the problem. I think it's a great idea that the government does employ people instead of giving them unemployment. Even if it's just sweeping the streets, something that is pretty easy to do. It makes them know that you start at a certain time, you finish at a certain time, you turn up every day. And that kind of, to then get a reference going, Alex worked for us for 6 months and he, did all the things we asked him to do. That is great for someone going forward. So I'm all behind that. But I do worry that there will be companies who will, as you say, farm this, and every 6 months they'll get a new unemployed person, and they won't really care if they're rubbish because they're not paying the bill. So it's no skin off their nose.
Do you think they're embedding welfareism into the country because they think it's going to increase their chances of being re-elected? I mean, is it that cynical? Could be.
I mean,
well, I think they've been doing that for a long time, and unfortunately, the Labour Party didn't start this. It's been going on for a long time.
Well, this is
if
a question
you're
I
a
want to-
government employee or if you're on welfare, you are going to vote for the government that's giving you employment or welfare. And unfortunately, a large proportion of the population are now fall into one or other of that bracket.
When is, I've raised this again in Parliament, when is the state going to be brought into line in terms of pensions for public sector employees? When are they going to come into line with what's happened in the private sector? There are virtually no final salary schemes left in the private sector, yet the state is an index-linked final salary scheme, and it's the liability, I said, is all off balance sheet. There's no logic to that. That should be on the balance sheet. Well, but I guess if we put it on the balance sheet, everybody would say you're bust, well, which we are.
Well, no, it's actually a Ponzi scheme.
It's a Ponzi scheme,
and that is why they keep employing the public service keeps getting bigger and bigger, because they need to bring in more people at the bottom to pay for the massive pensions they're handing out at the top. But the massive pensions are how they. If you look at an advertisement for a public service job, they will be offering 28% pensions or something like that. But most of them will say, oh, well, we deserve it because we get paid less than the private sector. But when you point out to them that in the private sector they can be fired, or in the public sector they can't be. So if they none of them will take that jump and leave the public sector and go and try and get a job in the real world and discover, yes, they might be paid more, but no, they won't be paid more for 50 years. They'll be paid more for about 5 minutes until they screw up in the same way that they've screwed up in Westminster.
Well,
and they'll be gone.
I've resigned myself to the fact that I'll probably never have a state pension. It's probably going to go under before I am old enough.
I thought that too. So you might be wrong
about
that.
As a final thought, Charlie, for our listeners, I think before they start raising taxes and effectively pushing people's personal and family budgets, and to your point, the family is incredibly important, under pressure, they should be cutting government, cutting the size of the state, and actually ensuring that the state runs efficiently. And I can tell you from sitting on these committees, it doesn't run even 10% efficiently. And really, the DWP, all these people who are handing out money incorrectly to people who are not contributing to our society, not creating wealth, not working hard, and taking advantage of those people who do work hard. Until we've got government running on rails, there should be a law to say there are no more tax increases. Because at the moment, as we said earlier, it is productive Britain funding unproductive Britain. And that's not the way it should be. It should be productive Britain providing a safety net for those people who actually need it. Not the 9 million people who are off with mental health or whatever other issues they've got. And I'm very sad if people have
Well, that was actually one of the better things she said in the budget, is that they're going to bring back face-to-face interviews for people getting... That is finally. I mean, and that seems to be such a no-brainer. You think, why has it taken so long? COVID finished 3-4 years ago. There's been absolutely no reason why people haven't been required to turn up and prove that they require some kind of disability benefit. And the fact that they can still put it in online. And I have a friend of mine whose husband unfortunately had a stroke, and she went online to find out about what she can get and how they can get some sort of mobility for him. And the first things that came up on the internet were these influencers telling her
How to game the system. Oh, my goodness.
And she couldn't believe it. The actual DWP site was right down the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
And she said it was just so... And in fact, at a dinner party the other day, someone typed into AI on their phone, what's the best way to get the most out of the DWP? And AI came up with all of the answers, all of the questions, what they had to say.
Yeah.
And you think, if it's that easy, and all she had to do is say, we're bringing back face-to-face interviews, job done.
Yeah.
Get government out of our lives, Charlie.
Indeed.
Let us get on with it. Let us interface on the level, whichever level we find.
Yes.
Get them out of our lives.
Well, a theme, I think, in what we were just talking about, which is the budget, the fiscal outlook for Britain, and the forecasts that are so consistently wrong, and indeed a theme that is emerging in our work, in your work on the Public Accounts Committee, and elsewhere, the questions that we're asking, is the fact that Britain seems to have no data on the things that really matter, whether that is the economy or whether indeed it is the number of illegal migrants who have absconded, who have just disappeared, who the Home Office doesn't know where these people are. And you asked Dame Antonia Romeo, your mate, on the Public Accounts Committee.
Well, as I called her, the Queen of Woke.
Quite, she didn't like that, did she?
That's what she's known as in Whitehall and in the media, but she didn't seem to recognise that.
No, indeed. But you asked her recently, and we've asked a written question before about the number of illegal migrants who have absconded. And on both occasions, the answer that you got was that they don't hold that data. There's no centralised place where that data is held. And yet, we have had this Home Office whistleblower approach us this week, and we've discovered that, in fact, they do have this data, and it is shocking.
We have indeed discovered that, Charlie. But I mean, we've discovered lots of things. I mean, that's one of the things. And obviously, the fact we've had a very brave whistleblower. And I do think if Britain's going to mend itself, people who are being oppressed within the state do need to feel free. And we've got our whistleblowing line, and we should say that Lewis Brackpool, absolute total protection for anybody who whistleblows.
Yes.
And we do need public sector malfeasance, misfeasance, whatever you want to call it. We need people to bring it to us, and we can then use it.
Yeah.
And in this case, yes, it appears that although we were told the data didn't exist, and we've been told it didn't exist on a number of occasions by the Home Office in answer to our parliamentary questions, we've discovered that it does go around weekly. So they do know the figure. We've got the figure now. Yeah. And the Home Office has not said it's wrong.
Yeah.
And in Home Office speak, they've actually said, more or less, they've confirmed it's right.
Yeah.
So we're pretty sure, we're 99.9% sure it's right. And I think there's no doubt that this figure does go around, in which case, not only have I had incorrect answers to my parliamentary questions, I've had an incorrect answer at the Public Accounts Committee. So I guess we've got to let the Public Accounts Committee deal with that. It was at that committee, so I don't really want to talk too much about that. In terms of answering questions from my office, and as you know, we ask loads of questions on lots of things. And I mean, and another example is the asylum hotels are often run by Serco, Mears, other private contractors. Yeah. We found it very difficult to get any information until you have to start asking the right question, because these people are quite happy to obfuscate if you don't actually ask the right question. So we have to keep drilling in. Bit like oil drilling, you go down vertically, and if you can't find anything, again horizontally, and then you go and you drill in at different angles, you get the facts. So we've discovered these asylum contracts aren't fit for purpose. They're paying for hotels as if they're full on a 5-year contract, when very often they aren't full, they're half full. There's all sorts of things, and if you look at Labour now, they are admitting they're saving money on these contracts. But again, to Catherine's point, if you've got no experience of the real world and you're signing these huge contracts, the civil service ends up having its face taken off by the private sector. Now that's not necessarily the private sector's fault, because it's a principal to principal contract, and in any private deal, if I do a deal with you principal to principal, it's caveat emptor, and actually caveat emptor is an incredibly important point, because actually regulation should basically just embed that concept, caveat emptor.
And for those of us who don't know what that means, Rupert,
well, it basically means if you get it wrong, it's your problem.
Yeah. Buyer beware.
Buyer beware.
Yeah.
But in what I call normal lingo, it's it's your problem.
Yeah.
You have to do your due diligence.
It's up to you to
Yeah.
make sure you check things out, and
Yes.
that's the essence of what regulation used to be, and that's what it should return to being.
Yes.
And if-
And this is sorry, Catherine, go on.
If you were going to hire a hotel to put up asylum seekers, you would probably go, well, I'll give you 50% of your full occupancy rate because it's going to be, for 5 years. Don't have to worry about being the off season, whatever. At least that's where I'd start.
Yeah.
But it would appear they've gone in and said, we'll pay for 100%.
And it's
No,
such a
And
cottage
never
industry.
questioned
And
whether,
Yeah.
that was
We've
reasonable.
uncovered this, Catherine, and we've
Yeah.
had a meeting. I had a meeting with Andrew Leader on it, and they just, they are extremely secretive. They know they're not capable of doing it properly. And like a lot of people who are incompetent, they tend to clam up and not be truthful.
Yeah.
And
And this
I
is-
think that's what's been happening.
And then, as your point earlier, you've got to get the wording right. They all have this civil service speak.
Yeah.
So the reason they could lie to your first question about absconders was because they don't call them absconders, they call them withdrawals.
Yeah.
And because you asked about absconders, they could say, oh, we don't have any absconders, because they seriously pretend that people who have left the system have withdrawn their application to be an asylum seeker.
Notoriously honest, those who break into the country illegally, aren't they?
Yes.
You're so right. You're so,
Yeah.
and we've learnt this.
Yes, and it is.
But they're shameless about, if you don't
yeah.
get it absolutely right, then.
Yeah.
So we found that on these contracts, because they've contracted out some of these services,
Yes.
we say what services, and because the contractor's doing it, they're not doing it.
Yes.
So we then had to say, okay, so if the contractor's doing it, what are you paying the contractor to do? So it's a game of sort of it's boxing and coxing to try and get at the truth. Now that's not a responsible state, as Jefferson said, should be transparent.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
I mean, as you said, Charlie, I don't mind paying my tax if it's being spent sensibly.
Yeah.
And there are things we need to spend money on, like defence.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you probably know that our defence budget is tiny compared with some of these welfare budgets that we're now carrying. Well, at a time when the world's probably as insecure as it's been for a very long time, is that wise? And the answer is no, it isn't.
Oh, it's worse than that, because we're about to give £6 billion to the EU so we can join their scheme, which is actually against World Trade rules. Meanwhile, Indonesia's just done a deal for £4 billion to buy defence equipment off the UK company Babcock. And it's like, but the only way the EU will buy that is if we first give them £6 billion, and then they might buy some of our defence companies. But the money will come from everyone in the country as taxpayers, but it will come back to a couple of defence companies if anything comes back. Might not come back.
You had some very important points to make about the EU and trade. I mean,
Yeah, well,
now's
that was-
probably a good time to actually mention.
Well, I
mean,
just was hearing
Brexit,
Ed Davey.
Ed
Well,
Davey.
Ed Davey was
the
on
less said about him,
breakfast,
the better.
BBC Breakfast Television, and his report on the budget, and his ideas are that all we need to do is rejoin the EU and everything will be perfect.
I'm sure.
Because
yeah.
Ed can't.
Not what the people want.
Well, he also can't point to the EU on a map, I imagine, because he's obviously not heard about the disastrous economy in France and in Germany. He doesn't understand that even Keir Starmer's reset, which I didn't notice in the budget, I don't know what they've called it, but there's a lot of money supposedly going to go back to Europe if we join their SPS scheme or if we join their emissions trading scheme. We have to pay them to join. And we will have to pay more money than our supermarkets will save. So again, taxpayers will be paying about £700 million a year, so that supermarkets can save $200 million in the imports, because supermarkets are too lazy to fill in their own forms.
This is what I mean. Like, it always ends up just ordinary people getting screwed.
Yes,
with this
ordinary
stuff.
people
Yeah.
will be paying for this rubbish, and even with the defence contract, we have to put $6 billion in. And so that our defence contractors, two of which are owned 25% by the French government,
Is that right?
and one of which is owned 25% by the Italian government. But we have to put money into the EU's coffers so that their little defence contract, which they call SAFE, S-A-F-E, could potentially bid on UK equipment, But they don't guarantee any sales.
Yeah.
So we might not get anything at all. And you're going, well, if you go for if you got $6 billion to put into defence, then you put them into UK defence. I'm sure our armed forces would love to have £6 billion worth of new equipment, which they can use to buy from UK companies who are so good that the rest of the world happily buys our equipment without us having to pay them first, so that they can then use that money to buy our own equipment if they like.
Well, I did see several articles saying that the budget, which obviously we just spoke a lot about, has accelerated Britain's sort of travel into becoming a European-style social democracy, which I read as just being, hurtling towards collapse, basically. Because as you say, if you look at the economies of the EU, I mean, they're not exactly models to follow, are they?
No, in fact, the only, people keep saying, oh, we've got the highest growth in the G7 or the second highest growth in the G7. Yeah. And in fact, it's like going, well, hang on a minute, you're comparing us to all of these countries that are collapsing with the exception of the US.
Yeah. And the thing that I find really troublesome, and again, I'm not like, anti-capitalist, although this isn't even capitalism as such we're talking about here, but it's the people who are looking to turn a profit off of all of this stuff. Because we were talking about asylum, and there was that story a few months ago about that guy, the hotel kingpin character who has contracted all of his hotels out to the Home Office, and he's a billionaire. He's an asylum hotel billionaire. Yes. And it's these people that I have such an issue with, because this is a British guy. This is, as far as I'm concerned, look, he's following incentives. He's a guy who wants to turn a profit. All the rest of it, sure. But actually, what is he? What is his? His business actually doing for the country? Well, he's kind of treacherous. To be honest with you,
if someone foolish enough in the government was going to knock on his door and say,
I'm going to give
I'd
you
like to
£1 billion
rent all of your hotels for 5 years, and they weren't even smart enough to say first, what's your occupancy rate here over the year? Because most hotels are very busy in their high season. It may be summer. It depends on where they are located. And then the rest of the year, they're half empty. And the government wasn't even smart enough to think about that and go, look, I'll give you guaranteed 70% occupancy or something like that.
So it's worse than that, Catherine. How much fraud is there in the system? I think when you get this central planning, as we know, northern Italy is probably one of the richest parts of Europe. And to your point on Europe, I mean, Europe, I think I'm right in saying, as a percentage of global GDP, it's fallen from something like 22% to 15% of global GDP.
Well, a lot of that is because we left.
Well,
people don't remember.
No, that was before we left. So
okay.
Ultimately, Europe is sclerotic and it's dying.
Oh,
I've watched it. I sat on some committees there and watched how protectionist they are.
Yeah.
And protectionism means you gradually self-immolate.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think fraud for me is a big issue. I think when you get central planning, when you get northern Italy subsidising southern Italy with huge transfers, you get sticky fingers. And when you get government dishing out contracts, you say they're bad contracts. Why are they so bad? Is there a reason for that?
Yeah.
Often there is a reason for it.
It's worth asking the question.
And this is what people need to realise. So I actually, as I said earlier, I do think organised crime has now got its fingers into the Great British Till, and it's going to be very difficult to get them out.
Well, it would, even if they're not organised crime. I think it's organised business. I mean, Serco seems to get so many of these contracts. How open are the procedure for handing out contracts?
I think they're still operating on COVID procurement rules in some places, which, as you know, there is no requirement for competitive tender.
Well, I also used to I used to I was the volunteer at a club, a swimming club, and we had to rent pool time, and I was surprised to see how many pool operators were the same people. And I decided that they weren't very good at running pools, but they're incredibly good at filling in the forms to get the contracts from the councils. So they obviously knew what words to say and how to sell it. They were good salesmen. Now, I don't mind that. The country needs good salesmen, but it seemed to be the skill to get a government contract is to understand how they hand out the contracts, what they're looking for, what words you need to say when you fill in the form, because there are quite complicated forms.
Or Catherine, you find a consultant.
Oh, well,
who's got
that's
a very
true.
Close relationship.
Well, that might be how you do it.
Yeah,
I know that could be how they do it. I don't know how they do it, but you will find there are half a dozen companies that are experts at getting government contracts, and from
why?
Small,
you have to ask yourself why.
Local government right through to the Westminster. Yes. Why? How?
Why?
How do they
Well,
do that?
it's like what you said last week, Rupert. That's that Solzhenitsyn quote about how to get by in the Soviet Union, you had to be a good liar. That's kind of what this sounds like.
That was the qualification.
Yeah.
And I think that's rapidly becoming qualification within the public sector in Britain.
Indeed. And meanwhile, there are 53,000 random men from all over the world walking our streets that the Home Office doesn't know anything about. I mean, this is the thing. It's just such a bleak outlook.
I think there are
their
even
application.
700.
Oh, of course, Catherine, you're so
They've
right.
withdrawn
They've
their
all gone
application.
home.
They've
Yeah.
decided they've gone home.
Yep, they've gone
They're
on a
not
boat.
walking
No,
around the
no, no,
streets.
no.
you
Yeah,
know?
they've got on a
They're
small
in the
boat
cash
from Dover.
economy.
Yes,
back
in
to,
fact,
back to
yes,
Calais.
yes,
yeah.
they-
Of course they are. Yes.
Yeah.
So pretty bleak outlook, really. But I thought we would end on something a little bit lighter, which is some questions from our very kind supporters and members. And you're both very welcome to give your thoughts on these. I thought we'd start with one that's relevant to what we were talking about, which is from Sanguine Chester on X. If Britain is heading towards insolvency, would you publicly commit to banning quantitative easing and ending the Bank of England's political independence? Now, Catherine, I'd like to go to you.
Yeah, can I go? Because this is a bit that I was going to talk about, but we haven't got to yet. Because the OBR has put a cost in for quantitative tightening of 164 billion is in the budget. And they've decided that depending on rates, if the interest rate goes up by a full 1%, I'm not talking about a 1% increase, but actual 1%, they think it will, it'll go up, the cost will go up by 39 billion. And if it drops, it'll go down by 40 billion. So that's the sort of order of magnitude of the cost of this. Now, when the government of Bank of England sells bonds that it owns, it's not actually quantitative tightening. It's just changing the ownership of those bonds that were created. So we created money when the government decided to give everyone money for furlough. And they did it by the bank basically buying the bonds. So it never went to the market with it. But there would be no capital loss if the bank allowed those bonds to mature. And most of the bonds were issued, they're short-term 5-year gilts, so that they are about to mature. And a lot of them, there's a big maturity going to happen in January next year. So all they need to do is just let them mature and then it's gone. But they haven't been doing that. They've been actively selling them into the market so that the bond still exists. But instead of the Bank of England owning it, it's now owned by some pension fund. And they might claim, well, that's taking cash out of the market. But the pension fund was always going to invest the money into a gilt. So it's not really. It would be different if they were selling them on the high street to mum and dads as they were walking by.
I totally agree, Catherine. I don't know why they don't run them to maturity, which they should do, and then they wouldn't suffer the capital loss. But I think I'm right in saying that actually the Treasury gave a guarantee to the Bank of England, so that the Bank of England doesn't actually realise the loss. So any loss that's realised, the Treasury picks up, i.e. the taxpayer. So a lot of it's sort of what I call accounting fiddles.
It is definitely.
And, there was that wonderful moment when they suddenly realised that the gilts that they had created and bought paid a coupon. And they hadn't budgeted for the coupon, so they suddenly found they had an extra load of money from the coupon on the printed gilts.
I didn't know that. You're kidding.
Oh, yeah, no, it's true. So, look, and then again, a lot of the Liz Truss stuff was due to the fact that, as you know, if you issue gilts when interest rates are zero, and you buy gilts back when interest rates are 4% or whatever they are, you take a big capital loss, huge capital loss. And that's what they were doing.
Yes. Well,
So they were issuing gilts, and again, the question is...
They announced it.
Correct.
They announced that they were going to sell 10% of their holdings the day before the mini-budget, and the gilt market started to drop immediately. But no one noticed that. The papers picked it up because politically they wanted to get rid of Truss, so that they happily blamed it on her.
But a lot of that trouble was people like Goldman Sachs were writing collars and caps on, because the endowment books of a lot of these pension funds were underwater.
Oh yeah, because they had done
they
the
had
LDIs.
to enhance yield, so they were writing volatility, and then when rates were put up, it actually created a major capital problem for them. But I think, I think with all this stuff, we and to the point of the questioner, quantitative easing, I think, is a complete crime and a fraud against the tax-paying British people. And all it does is it basically increases the amount of money in circulation and therefore devalues people's savings
Yeah.
It pushes up inflation. And
Well,
at the
that
end of
is
the day,
inflation.
you and
That's
I
what
can't
inflation
you
is.
and I can't do that.
Yeah.
If you tried to print money yourself to inflate your own budget, you get sent to prison.
Yeah.
But
And
somehow
rightly so.
somehow it's okay for the state to do it in your name. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
Is this just a doom spiral, by the way? Is there any pulling back from... I mean, I've heard the analogy before that the economic situation of Britain is something like being on a cruise ship and seeing an iceberg dead ahead, because by the time you've seen the iceberg, it's actually too late to correct course and you're going to hit it. Is that where we are?
Well, no, we could easily get the economy going again if we just stopped this swapping the money from the wealthier people and giving it to the people who are not working, and actually started lifting the taxes off private enterprise. And I would start with the energy profits levy. It was the easiest one for her to do. It raises almost nothing because so many people in the North Sea have decided to not bother because
why
it's
would
not
you?
worth it. Why
Yeah.
would they bother? Instead, they didn't do that. You know, if she wants to get more housing, drop all the taxes on housing.
Yeah.
Not just stamp duty, but all of the ridiculous costs of producing bricks and steel and
Yep.
cement and all of that stuff in the UK.
I don't think it's too late, Charlie. But again, she talks about, because she's so ignorant, she talks about regulating for growth. You don't regulate for growth, you deregulate for growth.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer, that if they want to create wealth, they've got to cut corporation tax to the lowest level in Europe. We look at what happened in Ireland. You only have to look there. Ireland went bust. The EU allowed them to run a tax arbitrage, basically to rebuild their balance sheet.
Yeah.
They allowed Ireland to have a corporation tax rate of 12%. What happened is everybody located in Ireland, funny that, a lot of big American companies.
Yeah.
Ireland rebuilt its balance sheet, and Ireland's now quite rich again.
It's
Dublin's
incredibly
humming.
wealthy.
Yeah.
But that was just an EU bailout for Ireland. They allowed to break EU rules. So
Yeah.
everybody else was still having to charge much higher corporation tax rates. So if it was me, now we've had Brexit, and I always, first of all, back the British people because that's the choice they made. And I'm not sure they made the choice of Brexit for financial reasons. I think they made that because they wanted their own nation state. They wanted control.
Sovereignty.
They wanted sovereignty. So actually, the money issue and the Ed Davey nonsense is complete rubbish. The truth is that in various parts of the world, our trade is going up quite dramatically. Places like Kazakhstan is doing fantastically well. But what we should have done is left, if the EU wouldn't play ball, left with a hard Brexit, we should have basically turned ourselves, I've always thought, into Singapore-on-Thames. And you look at Singapore, you look at what Lee Kuan Yew's done over the years. I mean, Singapore's GDP per capita, when I used to go there, was minuscule compared with ours. Singapore's now got a GDP per capita of twice ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's humming. People want to go there. They want to build businesses there. They want to bring wealth there. So to your point, if you get the right people in power, you can actually turn this around quite quickly.
Yeah.
But as I said earlier, you need like-minded people who understand the dynamics, who want to effectively release the innate creativity and ability of the British people. And I have huge faith in that. What we can't afford to see is more brain drain. We can't afford to see our best people leaving, which they will do. We can't afford to see them take their money with them.
Yeah.
We can't afford to see them basically set up their base overseas. I disagreed with the non-dom situation. I think the non-doms, okay, there's a bit of inequity, but they're very rich people. London 10 years ago is where everybody wanted to be. So London was humming. People were being employed. People were bringing money here. People were investing here. People were driving wealth here.
Yeah.
And, as I said earlier, in Sadiq Khan's war zone now, nobody's safe. Crime is through the roof. And part of a good and successful capitalist society is crime has to be low.
Yeah.
Because people don't take risk if other people then come and steal what they've effectively.
Well, I've had conversations with very wealthy individuals, British patriots, right, who don't live here anymore, who have the means to move elsewhere, who are enterprising and entrepreneurial and risk-taking and driven and all these sorts of things. You talk to them, and for the most part, these people will cite two things as being their reasons for not wanting to live in Britain anymore. It is crime and it is taxes.
Yep.
Right? It's
Crime's huge.
basic. It's just basic stuff.
Well, most of the foreign non-doms, who I seem to know a lot of them, they left. The thing that really drove them out, I mean, George Osborne started changing the rules, but it was the inheritance tax subject to all of their assets that are held outside of Britain.
Worldwide.
And that is the reason they're going.
Yeah.
And we should be getting rid of inheritance tax, not just for the non-doms, but and the farmers
for our
and
people.
the small businesses, but for
Scrap
all
it.
people.
And just in
If
principle
you
as
want
well.
to
It's so immoral. in my
If
It's
you
opinion.
taxed money.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you want to encourage people to build businesses here, they've got to have a reason to do that. And most people want to be able to leave it to their children. The idea that they're going to build something up all their life and then the government's going to walk in and go, oh, well, we need 40% of that, therefore you're going to have to sell half the business to pay for it.
Well, and then waste it on misdirected
And then give it to
fraud
people who are
and
not...
misallocation of funds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and give it to people on welfare.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah,
well,
joke.
you know.
So speaking of that, question from
It's a
Rachel.
very good question.
Yeah, well, it's very good. Thank you,
Yeah.
Sanguine Chester.
Yeah.
Question from Rachel A1892. Based on the evidence that you've seen so far, and this is obviously directed at you, Rupert, but Catherine, keen to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts as well. Which civil service department is most in need of reform? And that's small R reform, by the way. not
Yeah.
capital R
Well,
reform.
the Home Office is shocking, as we've seen.
Yeah.
And they're responsible for a lot of these, I don't call them asylum seekers, they're economic migrants, let's call them what they are.
Yeah.
But, and the DWP is a function of the Home Office, so I would have to say the Home Office.
Yeah.
I think what you've got to do, but I think all government departments, as far as I can see, police, I think there's a big issue there. There's a big issue with almost every government department. I just don't think they're doing what they should be doing, because to Catherine's point, none of them have run a business. They don't understand the sort of logical checks and balances you have to put in place to allow people to do their job effectively.
Yeah.
And I look with horror at almost everything in government, and I think it's a miracle we've staggered on this far, frankly.
Yeah, if you look at the central government departments, there's a fantastic spreadsheets you can look up on the internet. And since 2019, it's gone from about 400,000 people to 500,000 people.
This is what gets me.
And this is just central government. So this is not including local government, not including the NHS, not including the teachers and things like that.
Meanwhile, civil service productivity is going down.
Yes. And then it's not across the board. The increase in the 100,000 people, it's in about 5 departments. The biggest one, you'll be happy to know, is Home Office. They've
surprise.
the biggest increase and they're doing the worst job.
Yeah.
But the second biggest is Justice. This is the group that's just decided we can't afford jury trials. And
That was my friend Dame Antonia Romeo. She was at Justice before.
Was she?
Right.
Yeah.
You know.
She's like Midas, but the opposite.
And in
And
fact,
he's
it's-
now imbued with DEI.
Yeah. And some of the departments are a bit weird because we've put trade with BAYS, which was business and energy, and now it's trade and business, or business and trade, and energy is a separate thing. But now, out of nowhere, DESNES, as they like to call it, has 4,700 people, and it's...
Mad
What are these
Ed.
people, what are they all actually doing? Like, this is what
Very
gets
good
me.
question.
It's like,
Yeah.
the state is, as you say, over 500,000. Think about 500,000 people being in one place.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge number of people. What the hell are they doing?
You know what they say, Charlie? Want something done quickly, give it to a busy man.
Well,
Yes,
indeed.
yes.
Yes.
And
Right.
I think with the civil service, that's
Yeah.
why nothing happens. very
Nobody's
quickly,
busy.
'cause they're not busy.
Nobody's busy enough. Quite.
That's true.
Indeed.
That's probably true.
Next question from H. Rothwolf 1997. What is your advice, and again, this is for both of you, for young professionals who want to push things forward without HR's sword of Damocles dropping on their heads and thus their young families? Many city grad chaps are restore-ish behind closed doors, but they know that open unorthodoxy would blow up their careers. Rupert, I'll throw it to you first. It's a tough question.
It's
I
a
mean,
very good note. Look,
yeah.
it's a very good question, and I think I was lucky that the Britain I grew up in, we respected freedom because we'd fought 2 world wars. We were very lucky, a lot of us who were born after the war. I'm ashamed to say I was born in 1957, which tells you how old I am. So we didn't have all this nonsense and poppycock and regulation and political correctness and DEI. Although there's a great clip you dug out of me at Southampton yesterday. He found a clip of me at Southampton Football Club talking about
Was it opening of St Mary's, then?
political correctness in 2000.
Yeah.
Looking a lot younger than I do now. So that was a great clip. I enjoyed that. I'd forgotten I'd given that speech,
Yeah.
but that was for 1,500 people.
You've been on message for the last 25 years.
Oh, I haven't. Well, since fighting the Maastricht Treaty and standing for the referendum party, it's been non-stop. So no, I think it's very difficult, and particularly, as we say, given the number of jobs that now rely on the state, given the sort of the overbearing nature of the state in terms of imposing a code of conduct, imposing these sort of this concept of DEI, the concept of the Me Too movement, which I'm always fascinated that the Me Too movement never attacks Islam for its treatment of women,
indeed.
but they seem to skirt around that one and attack white males for being too masculine. I think white males are basically not masculine enough these days.
Indeed.
That's the problem.
No, they've been told there's evil
They've
to
been
be so.
emasculated by the Me Too movement. So the answer to that question is, you've got to box clever because you don't want to lose your job. But
And we need our guys in these institutions.
in the end, if you can't flourish in that environment, I've only got one message for them: go and set up your own business.
Yeah. Although, I mean, hey, easier said than done.
You
these
drive
days.
the politics. You decide then what the culture of the business is.
I've got to say, I mean, my view on this very quickly is that it's incredibly valuable for the movement at large to have skilled young professionals within these institutions. And actually, it's a question of discipline, in my view. I think you have to have the discipline to not need to talk about your politics at all times, as tempting as it might be, because I mean, look at the state of the country. It's hard. These topics always come up now in conversations with ordinary people, friends of mine, family, etc. But actually, I think a lot of time you do have to bite your tongue. I mean, I'm very fortunate because this is my job. Like I get to mouth off about my views about the country for a living. But actually, people who are in the city, who are in business and all that sort of thing, we need those guys in those places. And so actually, the best thing that those people could do, in a lot of ways, in my view, is, build up their capital, build up their CV and everything in those places, because we're going to need skilled people. We're going to need skilled people when, I think, when the revolution comes, if you want.
You're obviously doing something right, Charlie, because, the cabbie recognised you, not me, the other day when we were going somewhere. I thought that showed that you're doing a lot right.
That was pretty funny, thank you.
So what do you think, Catherine?
I'm skeptical about this. I think you've got to have courage to stand up and say what you think. I have found this incredibly during Brexit, because I was quite happy to be well known to be a Brexit supporter, and I was intrigued at how many people I knew who lived worked in the city, who would never, they would give me information. They were happy to come and have coffee and tell me all about what was going on, but they would not announce themselves as supporting Brexit in their company, claiming they would be fired.
Yeah.
But I have found if you have the facts, and when someone says something that you know to be wrong, you politely say, as I did the other day when someone was telling me that Brexit had caused us to trade with China, which is like insanely stupid. But anyhow, when you can just say, no, 2018 was our largest exports to the EU. When Ed Davies says on BBC Breakfast that, our trade has dropped because, dropped dramatically because of Brexit. When you go, no, the big trade in the last 12 months, first 12 months of Labour Party compared to the last 12 months of Conservatives, the big drop in our trade with Europe was in fuel. Well, there's a surprise.
Yeah.
Down by 9%. Also, chemicals were down. And our sales of ICE cars are down because the EU has the same mandate to buy electric vehicles. So when you actually break trade up into the different sectors, it's really obvious what is causing it. Net zero is causing our drop in trade, not Brexit.
But we had a trade deficit with Europe anyway.
Yes, well, we've
something
always
like
had a trade deficit.
105 billion.
Oh, yes.
In
No, they
2016.
don't want to hear that. But once you explain quite quick, calmly and factually, they're back down.
Yeah.
The other day, I was talking to 3 bond traders who were trying to blame the bond market on Liz Truss. And when I said, if you were real
long's it been
traders,
now?
you would know that the market started to fall the moment the Bank of England minutes from the meeting was published.
Yeah.
And they all, oh yeah, that's right, because suddenly they realised their credibility as bond traders was on the floor because they were trying to, blame it on her, and you go, no, anyone who was actually trading that day knows when the fall started, and it had they weren't even listening to quasi.
Do you know what economic experience Ed Davies had? I don't, but
No,
I suspect.
No, he's
not a
he's
great
the
deal.
water slide guy. He's never had
Yeah,
any
falls off,
experience in
yeah.
anything. He just gets media attention by being a fool.
Being a clown.
And then they allow him to say outright lies, and the BBC presenter who knocked him back at first. She did say, I don't think our trade's that bad. She then allowed him to come back and go, oh, no, it's fallen completely. And you're going, no, it hasn't. You were right the first time. Keep pushing. But she didn't. She backed off because he was so forceful that he was so right.
I should say to these young professionals, I completely agree with you, Catherine. I do think you should always speak the truth.
Well,
you should never lie about your views.
One of the reasons the city has been able to squash anyone who believes in Brexit is because 52% of the population voted for it, but most of them were too scared to say that out loud.
Yep.
And if every boss in the bank, an American bank in the city, realised that more than half his staff voted for it, he wouldn't take that attitude of, oh, you've caused all of our problems, you have to go.
But Catherine, it was actually, I think more would have voted for Brexit, but David Cameron spent £9 million sending that pamphlet around every household.
Absolutely.
Having told us he was going to be neutral, he then recommended, having got nothing from Merkel, he recommended that we should all vote to remain in the EU. What did the British people do? Ignored him.
Well, speaking of the British people, our next question from Thatcher Ivan. What do you both consider to be the greatest qualities of the British character? At which point in our history were these qualities most evident? And how do we restore this class of peculiarly British hero today?
Whoa. As a foreigner, but I grew up in a very, British Anglo-Saxon environment in 1960s Australia, I think there is a politeness. There used to be a saying that an Englishman was never rude unintentionally, and I think that was quite a good saying.
Yeah.
There was this, we'll wait our turn, we'll everyone will be served, just, follow the rules.
Queue up.
There is, it's not just in the queue, it's in all of life, this kind of expectation that you will be treated fairly. I think the rule of law, the property rights, all these sort of things that we just grew up expecting in Britain. And in the rest of the world, I have travelled a lot around various African and Asian countries many years ago before they became double our GDP per capita. And that was not the expectation. And that is, I think, a very British fairness. There is this idea that the British are fair. And most people who grow up in any sort of colony, any Commonwealth country, will have that attitude that we will expect to be treated fairly before the law and be treated equally before the law. And I think we've now imported a lot of people who come from very different environments. And they are happy to push in front of you in a queue when a train pulls in. I was intrigued. This short woman just pushed in front of me to get into a train and she, I'm thinking, this never, when I first came here in the 80s, I would often try and hail a cab standing far too close to a pedestrian crossing and was intrigued that the cars would stop. Because if you're standing anywhere near a pedestrian crossing, they used to stop for you. Now they honk at you. Now we have people, when you are legitimately crossing the road legally, you have the right of way. Cars driven by people who probably didn't get their license in this country, if at all,
or somebody else took their license for them.
Yes, or they'll honk at you.
So my answer to that, Charlie, is an interesting one. I think something is very special about the British people. I think a lot of our sort of bloodstock came from, and this is basically England, because it didn't necessarily happen in Wales and Scotland, but invasion and, from the Vikings to the Normans, the Vikings, then we've had obviously waves of Protestant Huguenots who were persecuted in France, to Jews who were persecuted throughout Europe. So a lot of the most able people, and this is what worries me, have come here. So there's an innate pool of tremendous ability.
Yes.
As Catherine said, tremendous politeness. Probably, as I said earlier, too polite in terms of accepting this sort of nonsense that's being dished
It's certainly been turned against
dished
us,
out by a deficient government. And I think, obviously, they've been, softened by the post-war period, which I think has lulled people into a false sense of security, which has given them a view of themselves which is probably wrong. I think a lot of the Protestantism that I think is responsible for our greatness has flowed away. And then obviously we've had this vast amount of low-grade immigration, which hasn't actually improved us. And in the same way that what made us great was people coming here to escape persecution elsewhere and to invade us if they ran out of food in the land of the Viking, the Nordic. I think now we're seeing the reverse happen. This is what's worrying. Our best people are leaving.
Yeah.
So we've got to stop the rot before we lose, as I say, the wealth creators, the rainmakers, the able people, and we've got to return Britain to being what it used to be, which is the best place on earth to live.
Yeah.
But we're not going to do that by rewarding indolence and taxing enterprise.
And we're also not going to do that by, and this is one of my great bugbears with the education that I went through during primary and secondary school, and university for that matter. It's the idea that Britain is actually not a people, it's just a set of abstract values. Because this is the problem, like, this question is so important, because actually the British people do have a character, right? And that character has been, historically, essentially as being a protagonist of history, in my view.
Well,
a defender.
You could argue, I mean, we did have our history before the Norman invasion. I mean,
Yes.
I think, obviously, we had the Vikings and like everybody, like the Romans, they assimilated into Britain. And you see it on my farm, for instance.
Yeah.
Under Trajan, which was sort of around 100 AD, you had Roman settlements on the top of the hill. By about 300-400 AD, when the Roman Empire was actually beginning to decline quite fast, they were all living down in the valleys with the rest of the British people.
Yes.
So we assimilated the Romans, and we obviously assimilated a lot of the Vikings. And if you go to the northeast, you can actually see good-looking, tall, blonde people. You know, they're very they're very distinct.
I'm about 5% Danish, so that means my ancestors.
So then the Normans came in. I mean, I don't particularly like the Normans, but they came in and they were quite brutal. But we had our own sort of, Anglo-Saxon, core, our own culture.
Yes.
And that got basically quite badly damaged by the Norman conquest. As again, it didn't really move up to Scotland. It didn't really move into Wales. So they're still quite separate to us. The Romans did actually invade, but they decided there wasn't much to take in Scotland. So they went back to the Antonine War and Hadrian's War. But so I think we're an exceptional people. I think we've lost our way, and I say people have got to stand up now. They've got to show that they want their country back, because if they don't, they're going to lose it. That's my view.
I can add to that, because I agree with everything you've said, and I think there was a lot of hybrid vigour by having that assimilation of different cultures.
I always think it's like a petri dish, the British Isles.
But it also made
England.
It made England very open to new ideas. They were a very creative race. We invented a huge amount of things, but they also were willing to travel around the world, live in hostile places. I mean, when the British arrived with their Victorian garb and lived in Australia, you've got to think, wow, they were tough.
Yeah.
Captain Cook,
dress
he
like
got
that.
killed, didn't he? In the end?
Well, he was killed in Hawaii. The Hawaiians.
He got killed on his travels.
Yeah, but they went to all sorts of places which were much harsher to live in than Britain, which had this lovely Gulf Stream. They went to Canada. They went all over the place. And but they assimilated the cultures there. They brought the food back. What intrigued me when I've lived in Italy and I've lived in France, and in Italy, even in the 1970s, there were no foreign restaurants. And when I once asked an Italian, is there a good French restaurant? Because in Australia, a French restaurant was where you took your mother if she was coming to visit you, sort of thing. And he looked at me askance, like, why would anyone eat in a French restaurant? We have Italian restaurants here, And that was their attitude, even to another EU nation. They didn't like their food.
Yeah.
And the British were never like that. It was almost the opposite, where there were no British restaurants when I first got here.
Yeah.
Restaurant meant foreign food, basically, almost, there were fish and chips.
Our biggest mistake was losing the American colonies.
Well, definitely, 100%.
Bad errors of judgment on behalf of our leaders.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And now they have the largest empire in the world, and we've lost ours. Very sad.
Exactly.
Very
Well,
sad.
Yeah.
But this is the point. I mean, on the British character, this is so important, I think, because we do need to have an answer to this question. Because what is it that we're actually fighting for? If not, it's not just this landmass, and it's not just an economy, and it's not just a democracy. It is actually the people, the British people, who have existed here literally for thousands of years, unbroken.
It's our country. It's our country, Joe. We're fighting
But
for
it's
our country.
also your way of life.
Yeah.
Because America may have the biggest colony, but the American system is basically the British system.
Yes.
They took they were all, the 13 original colonies were all from the British Isles mainly from
English
England,
stock, basically.
mainly English stock, and with some Scottish Enlightenment ideas, they set up that their whole constitution, everything basically comes from Britain.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of their constitution comes from the Civil War.
Yeah.
Yeah,
From
so that
John Lambert.
Yeah.
I told you.
Yes. Instrument of government.
exactly.
The instrument of government.
Yes.
I always forget. I always get either government wrong or instrument wrong.
Yeah.
The instrument of government, which
Yes.
is embedded within the Bill of Rights, and then the Americans, Madison, Jefferson, Adams, and Jay, lifted parts of it, and it's in the U.S. Constitution, which is the greatest document that a group of what I call high-minded individuals put together. And don't forget, those were the people who threw off us as the colonial power.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with what both of you are saying, though. I think what we're getting at here is something I've thought a lot about before. Is the sort of the two halves of the British spirit, if you want, because you have got the imperial, world dominating, incredibly powerful aspect of the British character, which is what drove the empire. It's what drove the creation of the United States as well, in my view. But then you also have the homely, kind of cosy shires aspect of the English and British character. And I think it's the marriage of those two things that has created us as being such a unique people who have been able at once to create a globe spanning empire and actually during that not commit really any terrible atrocities, unlike almost every other empire in history. Because this is the thing. I really do believe that the British Empire was an almost untrammeled force for good in the world. We brought nothing but, we brought civilization to the places that we colonized.
But I do think now, Charlie, we've got to accept the fact that we've been living on our reputation for too long.
It's not true. We're not. Yeah, we're not an empire.
As you say, we owe a lot to the Victorians. We probably still the wealth that we created, which was almost unrivaled ever.
Not
is,
almost,
is still,
actually.
is still supporting this nonsense.
Yes.
I actually think, and I say to everybody, we're going to probably have to put on a hair shirt and take a step back and accept the fact that we're only going to get out of this if we're prepared to fight for it, to work hard, and to probably accept a lower quality of life in the short term, but to rebuild something to make us proud.
Yeah.
Because I was talking about AI earlier, and I think I don't buy into this business of, AI going to allow people to be indolent and do nothing. People need to respect themselves. They need to feel proud of what they are, of what they've achieved, of what the work they're doing.
Yeah.
We're going to have to get back to basics, and we're going to have to start rebuilding and actually taking a pride in what we are, who we are, and how we behave.
That, by the way, is the narrative that's pushed by the likes of Larry Fink. They're always talking about how AI is going to mean that it will be good for populations to decline and people can just laze around all day, this sort of thing.
But the Ed Miliband has saved us all from AI. We'll never have enough energy.
We all need saving from Ed Miliband, I think.
Well, we do. I'd prefer to get rid of Ed, but he's going to get rid of AI
we better finish there, Charlie.
Because we cannot possibly ever have enough cheap electricity if we're relying on wind and solar. We don't have enough sun. We do have enough wind, but it's in the wrong place. And AI runs on regular 24/7 power.
Yes.
Cheap, because they use lots and lots and lots of it. So the AI revolution is going to Saudi Arabia. The AI revolution is going to Texas. The AI revolution is not coming to Britain while Ed's in power.
No. And I've got to say, just to wrap up, something our senior policy fellow Harrison Pitt likes to say is that when the British eventually wake up, it's going to be over for everyone else, which I quite like. And that's a positive thing to end on. So thank you very much for joining us again, ladies and gentlemen, for the Restore Britain podcast. And we will be back with you next week. And be sure, by the way, to send in your questions for next week, and we will put it towards our wonderful guests. Thank you very much.
Well done, Charlie.
Thank you.